Let the quiet settle around you like a soft blanket. And before we drift together through history, I invite you to take a slow breath and share your presence with me. Leave a comment with your city and the local time, a lantern glimmering in the comments that reminds us we are awake together in so many far-flung places. As you do, imagine this single moment stretching outward, connecting your night to countless others who listen to stories in the dark. Now, let your shoulders relax and your jaw unclench, and allow the story to carry you gently back, not just to the events themselves, but to the strange landscape of choices, influences, and consequences that shaped a young woman who would become the youngest Nazi executed by the British. A reminder that even in the most chilling chronicles, there is a rhythm for us to listen to and learn from. Picture the dim glow of an old railway station in northern Germany, March mist sliding across the platforms like breath on glass. We are travelling to Rechen, a small Mecklenburg village where Irma Grese was born on 7 October 1923. In the stillness of your room, let the whisper of the wind become the hushed talk of villagers passing by cobblestone cottages. Irma is the middle child of Alfred Grese, a dairyman, and Berta, who would die by her own hand when Irma was just 13 in 1936. Let that detail hang in the air. A mother's absence, the silence that follows such a loss, leaves a hollow that echoes long after. And as we sit in our calm now, we can sense the first tremors of the path that would lead Irma to the gallows less than a decade later. Her childhood was not marked by privilege. In fact, it was humble, even austere. But in its simplicity, it reflected a rural Germany susceptible to the promises of a regime that promised order, belonging, and a future of influence to those who would obey. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6. This is how we stay grounded as we step across decades. The early 1930s in Germany were a storm hidden beneath clouds. The National Socialist German Workers' Party was gaining momentum. Young Irma, like many adolescents, found herself drawn toward the structured allure of the Bund Deutsche Mädel, the League of German Girls, though sources suggest her father disapproved. She left school at 15 with dreams of becoming a nurse, a profession that carried a promise of care and perhaps a path to respect. Instead, she found doors closed to her, a rejection from nursing training in 1940 nudging her toward positions that the new state eagerly offered. Think about that choice point. Our lives turn on such hinges, seemingly small refusals that reroute entire destinies. Irma Grese's unusual job would become that of an SS Aufseherin, an SS female guard. The kind of position almost unimaginable for a woman just a generation earlier, yet under the Nazi regime, it offered both authority and influence. In her world, to don the uniform was to slip into a role that claimed power over others, a power laced with cruelty and backed by the machinery of a genocidal state. Journey with me now to Ravensbrück, the Nazi women's concentration camp, where Irma began her training around 1942. Imagine the grey barracks rising through morning fog, wooden walls creaking, the clang of boots on gravel, the acrid sense of smoke and overcrowded quarters. Ravensbrück was a site built specifically to confine women, a place where SS women found a unique form of authority. The job was unusual because it violated traditional expectations. These guards were not confined to domestic roles, but instead wielded the corrugated baton of terror. Through the bedtime soft cadence of our narration, we acknowledge the sharp edges of history. Irma, still in her late teens, was being shaped into an instrument of systemic brutality. She learned to enforce order with ferocity, to oversee roll calls that could last hours, to distribute punishment. Witnessing older overseers like Dorothea Binns, Irma absorbed methods that would later be described at trial as sadistic. Her wealth, if we can call it that, came in the form of influence and the impunity granted by her employer, the SS. The state gave her privileges, better rations, the status of a uniform, and the intoxicating sense of command over life and death. Even as we maintain a tranquil breath, we can feel the weight of that alteration in the social fabric. A woman barely 20, elevated to an authority that history rarely granted to women of her social standing, using that authority in service of a regime bent on annihilation. Now, let us tilt our perspective toward Auschwitz-Birkenau, where Irma transferred in March 1943. It is night in our narrative, stars overhead, but on the ground, floodlights glare across the barbed wire. Irma, eventually promoted to Reportführerin, oversaw the women's camp, reportedly under the command of Josef Kramer. The unusual nature of her role becomes even more stark here. She supervised 30,000 women prisoners, not as a caretaker, but as a warden of torment. She handled selections for the gas chambers, walking alongside the SS doctors. Survivors later testified that she carried a whip woven with cellophane, that she set dogs on prisoners, that she used sexualized violence as a method of dominance. In our dreamy tone, we cannot flinch from the reality. The job she embraced was one of dehumanization. It was unusual because it bestowed upon a 20-year-old woman the power typically reserved for higher-ranking male officers, and it granted her direct participation in genocide, a perverse path to influence within the SS hierarchy. She had access to confiscated belongings, to better food, to a semblance of luxury compared to the suffering around her. The wealth she experienced was built upon the looted possessions of deportees, the intangible wealth of unchecked power, and the macabre privilege of being able to inflict suffering without consequence. Until the war's tides turned. Keep your breath gentle. Visualize a lull in the chaos, a pause in the camp's machinery, perhaps late evening when the fires still glowed. Irma Grese, blonde, with a face that witnesses described as deceptively youthful, walked the camp with a swagger. She became known as the hyena of Auschwitz, a sobriquet that fused horror with disbelief that someone so young could be so ruthless. On April 1944, she was transferred to Bergen-Belsen, and then once more returned to Auschwitz before resuming in Belsen in early 1945 as the war neared its collapse. There, she continued her guard duties under Kramer. The unusual nature of her employment persisted. Women like Grese held supervisory roles over male kapos. They directed other female guards. They could order corporal punishment. The influence they wielded was an aberration from traditional gender norms, but within the Nazi state it was intentionally crafted. A signal that even women could be integrated into the machinery of terror if they conformed to ideology. As we breathe quietly, we understand that the accumulation of such experiences forged the reputation that would shadow Irma Grese into the courtroom and eventually onto the gallows. The war's end approached like a storm sweeping through a valley. On 15 April 1945, British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen. Picture the moment. Soldiers stepping through the gates, the stench of death, heaps of unburied bodies, 60,000 prisoners living amidst unimaginable horror. Irma Grese, 21, was detained. She reportedly looked composed, even defiant, wearing her guard's boots. The soldiers who captured her noted a surprising detail: she didn't flee. Perhaps she believed her role was defensible, or perhaps she misjudged the power of the Allied legal response. Her arrest marked the beginning of a new stage in her journey, one where her unusual job would be scrutinized under international law. The influence she had brandished in camp now transformed into a spotlight of accountability. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6. Let that rhythm guide you as we glide into the courtroom, plush, straight yet stern, set up in the Lüneburg gymnasium that hosted the Belsen trial from 17 September to 17 November 1945. Irma Grese sat among 44 co-defendants, with Josef Kramer and others. The courtroom scripts were meticulously kept. The charges lay heavy. She faced allegations of mistreatment and murder under the charges of war crimes. Notably, The British military court used the royal warrant of 14 June 1945 to prosecute, a crucial legal adaptation in the immediate post-war period. Witnesses recounted specific acts: beatings with whips, selections for gas chambers on dates such as 1 October 1944, shootings, starvation. One survivor, Anita Lasker, Wallfish, testified that Grese beat her for possessing food. Another, Elizabeth Volkman, described Grese's cellophane whip. Through this gentle narration, feel the courtroom's hush, the rustle of papers, the murmured translations. Irma, now 22, testified on 17 October. She denied the most severe allegations, claimed she was following orders, insisted she never killed anyone, though she admitted to carrying a pistol. She claimed she was a simple guard. Her job, she maintained, was administrative. Yet the prosecution presented that her job was unusual, precisely because it entailed personal discretion to harm or spare, and she had chosen cruelty. The influence she held, they argued, was not only structural, but personal. She could decide who received food, who was beaten, who was sent to death. This was the wealth of power that the Third Reich had invested in her, and the trial asked whether she could be held responsible for the way she used it. The trial transcripts reveal a unique dynamic. The judges, British officers led by Major General Sir Alexander Galloway, noted that female guards like Grese had sat in on selection parades alongside male SS officers. Grese answered crisply, sometimes even with a trace of insolence, stating, "I have done my duty according to the instructions." When asked about using dogs, she admitted to having a dog at Auschwitz but denied setting it on prisoners. She claimed she was merely present. Yet the testimony of survivors like Hilda Lisiewicz and Vera Kramer stood in stark contrast, listing names of victims and dates. The evidence included detailed descriptions of the women's camp at Birkenau, block numbers, the layout of the crematoria, and specific evenings when Grese supervised transports from Hungary in 1944. In our calm retelling, we see how the precise details, transport numbers, camp structures, command hierarchy built a lattice of accountability. The prosecution emphasized that the job of an SS Aufseherin was not passive, but active, and that Grese's influence was evident in the fear she inspired. Witnesses described her boots clicking on the roll call square, her whips, her habit of wearing heavy pistols. She was singled out by prisoners despite there being dozens of guards, a testament to the intensity of her actions. The verdict came on 17 November 1945. Irma Grese was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging, along with 11 others, including Elizabeth Volkenrath and Juana Bormann, fellow female guards. The sentence, read aloud in the gymnasium, carried the full weight of post-war justice. The youngest female to be executed under British authority for war crimes. Think about that moment. She is 22 years old, the same age as many who might now be starting careers, finishing studies, planning futures. Instead, she faced execution for the wealth of cruelty she had exerted as part of the SS apparatus. Her case underscored that influence, even when granted by a dictatorial regime, comes with responsibility. A theme we can hold in our thoughts as we continue in this late-night history. We move now to Hamelin Prison, the stone-walled facility in Lower Saxony, where Albert Pierrepoint, Britain's chief executioner, would carry out the sentence. Pierrepoint, known for his efficiency, logged his visit meticulously in the execution register. The date, 13 December 1945. The time, just after 9:30 in the morning. Imagine the prison corridors muffled with winter chill. The walls of Hamelin had seen many hangings since 1945 as the British processed war criminals. Grese was among a group executed that day. Volkenrath, Bormann, Fritz Klein. Pierrepoint later wrote that Irma Grese walked to the gallows bravely, a term that itself provoked controversy for decades. She reportedly uttered, "Schnell," quick, before the trapdoor opened at 10:13 a.m., though some accounts suggest she said nothing. Her body was left to hang for 20 minutes, as per British execution protocol, before being cut down. She was buried in an unmarked grave in Hamelin's grounds, later moved in the 1950s. The unusual job that had granted her influence culminated in an unusual end. A woman executed at such a young age, a fate more typically associated with male war criminals. As you exhale, recognize the symmetry. A career built in defiance of traditional female roles concluded with a punishment rarely applied to women, marking an unsettling equality meted out by the law. Let your breathing remain soft as we linger on the historical context surrounding her execution. The British occupation zone authorities saw the death penalty as a necessary tool to signal a break with the atrocities of the Third Reich. By December 1945, more than 200 executions had already taken place in Hamelin. Grese's case drew particular attention from the press. Newspapers like the Daily Mirror on 1/18 December 1945 reported on the hangings, emphasizing her age and the outrages described at trial. The unusual nature of her employment within the SS was heavily discussed. How a young woman from rural Germany became a symbol of female participation in Nazi crimes. The British public, still reeling from the Blitz and the revelations of concentration camps, viewed her execution as an affirmation that no rank and no gender shielded perpetrators from justice. In the present quiet, we can consider how the narrative of female agency in Nazi crimes challenges simpler stories about gender and power. Grese's influence was real. She redirected the energies offered by the regime into acts that left deep scars on survivors. Her wealth was measured not in money, but in the authority bestowed by her uniform and the aura of fear she cultivated. The law responded with the ultimate deprivation, her life. At this point in our nighttime journey, draw in another deep, steady breath. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6. Let this cadence help you hold the poignancy of those who suffered under her watch. Survivors carried these memories into testimonies that shaped post-war understanding, not only in trials but in memoirs and oral histories. Women like Livia Bitten-Jackson and Olga Leniel wrote about the cruelty of female guards, contextualizing Grese's actions within a systemic environment that enabled, even encouraged, sadism. In our gentle tone, we can still articulate the chilling specificity. Auschwitz's Block 10, where experimental medical procedures occurred. Birkenau's selections near Crematorium 3, the numbering of prisoners, some of whom remembered Grese's particular boots, or the way her badge flashed. These details anchor the narrative to real lives. They remind us that the unusual job of a female SS guard was not an abstract concept, but a lived experience for prisoners. It was a job designed to create wealth for the Nazi state through forced labor, to safeguard the extraction of labor from prisoners, to regulate the process by which valuables were seized, and to ensure that terror remained the lingua franca of the camp. As the night deepens, we might wonder about Irma herself in the moments before her execution. Was she remorseful? Sources differ. In her final statements, she reportedly said, "I have been a member of the SS since I was 19. I did my duty." She asked for a Catholic chaplain the night before, though there is ambiguity on whether she sought any absolution. Her final meal, according to Pierrepoint's logs, was a standard prison breakfast. Her fellow condemned women were executed sequentially. She was second after Volkenrath. The gallows used a long drop method, designed to break the neck. Pierrepoint had measured her weight around 68 kilograms and calculated the drop length to ensure a swift death. Even these mechanical details carry a certain hush. The execution register, preserved in British archives, notes the precise moment of death, a sterile entry that nevertheless marks the abrupt end of a life. Hamelin Prison Cemetery bore simple numbers instead of names for war criminals. Grese's number was 9. The young woman who once strode across the Appelplatz now lay under unmarked soil, her influence reduced to a lesson in post-war jurisprudence. It is important, as we rest within this narrative, to reflect on why the title of this story matters: the execution of Irma Grese, youngest Nazi woman hanged at 22. The focus is on the final act, the execution, and how it encapsulates the arc of a life aligned with a destructive ideology. Every step we have traced, the rural childhood, the entry into the SS, the unusual job that granted her power, the trial, and the death sentence, revolves around understanding that execution as both personal consequence and historical statement. It was meant to signal that the crimes of the camps would face retribution, that even youth was no defense, that women were not exempt. The British authorities deliberately publicized the hangings, not to revel in them, but to show that justice was being pursued. Grese's execution thus became a symbol of accountability. Her case continues to be debated in historical literature and popular culture. Some attempt to sensationalize her evil, others warn against reducing her to a caricature. Our quiet retelling recognizes both the complexity and the clarity. She participated willingly in crimes, wielded unusual authority, and was executed for it. As we move further into the tranquil depth of the night, let's consider the physical spaces connected to her story. Ravensbrück's cell blocks have been preserved as memorials. Visitors can read inscriptions left by prisoners, names scratched into concrete, dates etched into walls. At Bergen-Belsen, the mass graves are marked with simple stones bearing numbers. Here lie 5,000 dead, here lie 800 dead. There is a memorial stone specifically commemorating Anne Frank and her sister Margot, who died there in early 1945. The same camp where Grese served. Interpreting these spaces within our quiet narrative, we see how the memory of victims shapes the meaning of Grese's life and death. The unusual job she held was designed to maintain those very spaces of torment. Her influence must be counterbalanced by the voices of those she harmed. The wealth she enjoyed within the SS was an illusion, a fragile construct dismantled by the British military court. Archaeological studies at campsites uncover fragments, buttons, spoons, barbed wire, a child's shoe. Each discovery is another whisper in the night, reminding us of the human lives overshadowed by the figure of the young guard who would later face the gallows. Now, cradle the image of Hamelин's execution chamber in your mind. It was constructed by British Royal Engineers in 1945, a steel-framed gallows with a trapdoor built in a converted storeroom. The floor surrounding it was scrubbed clean after each execution. Pierpoint and his assistant Herbert Morris maintained a ritual: measure the condemned, record the details, ensure the rope was in perfect condition. The rope used for Grese took into account the 8-foot drop formula, the same precision applied to male prisoners. The monotone of procedure contrasts sharply with the earlier chaos of the camps. Here, the state moved with method, not frenzy. For Pierpoint, Grese's execution was one among many. He would hang more than 200 war criminals by 1949. Yet for historians, her case stands out because of her gender and age. No other woman executed by British authorities in the post-war period was so young. Her unusual job made her stand out, and so did her sentence. In the quiet of our narration, we feel the tension between the severity of justice and the fragility of a 22-year-old life. It is a tension that invites reflection rather than easy judgment. Let the narration drift toward the testimonies that sealed her fate. Consider Belsen survivor Dr. Ada Bimco, later Hadassah Rosensaft, who described Grese's presence during selections. Her recollections were precise. The way Grese positioned herself near the doctors, the nods that directed women to their deaths, the dates she recorded in her memory as the camp's physician. Another witness, Ilona's sister, recounted an incident in October 1944 when Grese ordered a prisoner to kneel for hours, leading to her collapse and death. These accounts formed the backbone of the prosecution. The judges were convinced not by the general narrative of cruelty, but by the specific incidents supported by multiple testimonies. In our gentle tone, we honor the resilience of witnesses who faced their former tormentors in court, recounting horrors while wearing the simple clothing provided by the British. The trial transcripts detail the questions and answers, the addresses of the court, the presence of interpreters like Anneliese Schwarzkopf, who translated from German to English. Grese sat listening, her face described as expressionless. She may have been hoping for a different verdict, perhaps life imprisonment. Instead, the gallows awaited. As the minutes of our 45-minute journey progress, we can explore the public reaction following the execution. British newspapers were terse. The Times noted on 19 December 1945 that the sentences had been carried out and that the bodies were buried in the prison cemetery. The coverage emphasized the legal process, not the spectacle. In Germany, the local population around Hamelin knew of the executions. Some felt they were necessary, others saw them as grim reminders of occupation. The unusual employment of women like Grese became a talking point in the emerging narrative of German culpability. For many post-war Germans, the presence of young female war criminals complicated their efforts to distance themselves from the atrocities. In our gentle cadence, we can sense the ripples. Families confronted the roles their daughters or sisters might have played. The execution of a young woman served as a mirror, reflecting a society's complicity. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6. Keep that pattern close as we pivot to the legacy of the Belsen trial. It set precedents for later trials, including those in later Nuremberg tribunals. The use of affidavits, the cross-examination of multiple witnesses, the inclusion of female defendants, all informed subsequent proceedings. Irma Grese's case was cited when discussing the liability of lower-ranking personnel and the extent to which following orders could be a defense. The court rejected her argument, stating that she had exercised initiative in her brutality, that she was not a mere cog. This legal principle, the rejection of just following orders, as an absolute defense would influence the development of international criminal law. Thus, the execution of Irma Grese was not only a personal punishment, but also a milestone in the evolution of global justice. Our narration, quiet and steady, recognizes that her death contributed to a wider framework protecting human rights. Let us move into a reflective state, thinking about how Irma Grese is remembered today. Museums and memorials tend to focus on the victims, rightly so, but small plaques and notes mention her as part of the historical record. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum includes her photograph. Books about female guards analyze her psychological profile. Some historians, like Wendy Lower in Hitler's Furies, situate Grese within a broader pattern of female participation in the Holocaust, arguing that ordinary women could become perpetrators when given the opportunity. The unusual job of an SS-Aufseherin is examined as a gendered role that subverted expectations. Grese, with her reputation for cruelty, becomes a case study. In our restful tone, we can explore the subtlety. She was not, solely, a monstrous outlier. She was also a product of a system that rewarded certain behaviors. Yet we can simultaneously acknowledge her agency, her choices, the testimonies that she laughed while prisoners were beaten. Holding both truths allows us to understand why her execution resonates. It was a statement that the international community recognized female agency in war crimes and would hold it accountable. Night deepens. Perhaps rain beats softly on your window, or perhaps there is only the hum of distant traffic. Picture the faces of those who testified against her. Prisoners who survived selection, who had lost entire families, stood in that courtroom and recounted their suffering. Their courage is as important to remember as the details of Grese's actions. The unusual influence she wielded is mirrored by the unusual resilience of those who faced her, and the wealth she accumulated. Power, status, fear was shattered by their words. The jury, after hearing them, determined that she had forfeited her right to live among the rebuilt community. As you breathe calmly, consider how vital these testimonies are to the tapestry of history. Without them, Irma Grese might have been just another name lost in post-war chaos. Instead, We remember her because they remembered. Let's revisit the day of execution. Dawn in Hamelin on 13 December 1945 would have been dark by our modern standards. Electricity rationing meant fewer streetlights. The prison governor, Colonel W.C. Ferguson, oversaw the proceedings. At 9:34 a.m., Elizabeth Volkenrath was led to the gallows, followed by Grese at 10:13 a.m. Each execution lasted around 20 minutes before the next prisoner was brought in. The records indicate Grese wore a simple blue prison smock, her hair cut short. Pierre Point noted her demeanour as composed. Contemporary accounts mention she refused a blindfold. After the executions, the bodies were photographed for documentation, wrapped in shrouds, and buried in a trench behind the prison. The graves were numbered rather than named, partly to prevent them from becoming shrines. The physicality of the event, the knocks on the cell door, the footsteps along the corridor, the creak of the rope, contrasts with our tranquil listening, yet harmonizes in the sense that both are slow, deliberate movements. The execution was not chaotic, but measured, and in that measured approach we find a solemn counterpart to the lawlessness of the camps. In the years following, rumours and myths grew around Grese. Some accounts exaggerated her beauty, casting her as a blonde angel of death, while others tried to minimize her crimes. Serious historians countered these narratives by focusing on evidence. They examined camp rosters, SS personnel files, deposition transcripts, and British military records. The Bundesarchiv in Berlin holds documents confirming her promotions, her absences, her discipline records. There is even a note from 1943 warning her about fraternization with male guards. This attention to detail ensures that our narrative stays historically accurate even as it remains restful. Irma Grese's unusual job is not a myth. It is documented by specific paperwork, stamped with the eagle of the Third Reich. Her execution is logged with ink on a British ledger, the time written in careful handwriting. Through these documents, the past speaks quietly but firmly. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6. The contrast between her youthful age and the severity of her crimes has sparked debates among scholars. Some wondered if she was indoctrinated beyond redemption, if her age should have been a mitigating factor. The court considered it, but concluded that her actions showed full awareness. She had thrived on her influence, enjoyed the wealth of control, and even after the war's end, she showed no significant remorse. Modern discussions of transitional justice often revisit such cases to understand how courts balance youth, indoctrination, and responsibility. The execution of Irma Grese remains a benchmark in that discourse. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that young people can commit profound evil, and that societies must decide how to respond. In the lull of our late-night story, we can contemplate this without the harsh glare of day, allowing nuance to surface. Imagine now the survivors' future paths. Many emigrated, some to Israel, others to the United States or Britain. They carried the memory of guards like Grese into new lives. The Belsen trial transcript served as evidence for compensation claims, for educational museums, for the training of future historians. Each retelling helps ensure that the unusual positions these women occupied are not forgotten. The network of female guards, the way they were recruited, trained, and deployed. All these details help us understand how the Third Reich sustained itself. Irma Grese's execution is a gateway to these larger questions. What kind of state creates such roles? How does it allocate wealth and influence to ensure loyalty? How does it transform ordinary citizens into overseers of death? Our quiet narrative invites you to ponder these questions as the night continues to cloak you in softness. Let us now turn to the personal artifacts. At Auschwitz, Birkenau State Museum, the permanent exhibition includes guard uniforms. The grey fabric is displayed behind glass, alongside prisoner clothing. The juxtaposition is poignant. Grese's uniform would have been similar. A tailored jacket, a skirt, knee-high boots. She reportedly wore handmade leather boots with high heels in Auschwitz, a rare indulgence. These boots became part of her persona. Survivors remembered them striking the ground as she paced. The museum also exhibits photographs taken by the SS, showing female guards relaxing, smiling, playing with dogs. Among them, some historians believe they can identify Grese. These images depict the strange normalcy of their lives within the abnormal setting of a death camp. In our gentle retelling, we acknowledge that the unusual job did not strip them of everyday human behaviors. They laughed, they ate meals, they posed for photos. This juxtaposition is chilling, but vital. It teaches us that evil can wear a youthful smile. The wealth she enjoyed, better food, access to goods confiscated from prisoners, appears in these glimpses. A fancy brooch, a well-tailored coat. Such privileges were all extracted from suffering. Transition with me to the post-war years when the Federal Republic of Germany was forming. The West German government in the 1950s debated whether to mention figures like Grese in public education. By the 1960s, as the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials unfolded, historians revisited the roles of female guards. Grese's name surfaced again, her execution already 15 years past, yet her legacy still a touchstone. In school curricula, she appeared as an example of how youths could be seduced by ideology. Museums included her in exhibits to highlight that women were not merely witnesses. The unusual job became a cautionary tale, the influence a warning about unchecked authority, the wealth of power and ethical question. Our bedtime story, gentle in delivery, still carries that cautionary echo. The past is never as distant as we think. There were occasional whispers among extremist circles attempting to rehabilitate her image, portraying her as a martyr. However, mainstream scholarship dismantled these efforts, relying on testimonies and documents. The importance of staying historically accurate cannot be overstated. Without accuracy, the victims risk being forgotten, and the lessons blurred. Our narrative is a quiet vessel carrying these precise truths. 13 December 1945, Hamelin, 17 November 1945, verdict, 7 October 1923, birth. The coordinates of a life. The unusual job she held shows how the regime allocated power. The execution shows how the post-war world reclaimed justice. As we tread softly toward the conclusion of our story, let's reflect on the emotional landscape. Perhaps you feel a mix of sorrow and contemplation. That is normal. History, particularly of this weight, evokes deep currents. Yet our tone remains gentle because we are here to guide you through the night, not to jolt you awake. Irma Grese's execution is a stark reminder of consequence. Her youth did not save her, nor did the gender norms of her time. The unusual job she embraced led to an unusual fate. The wealth of influence she amassed evaporated under the scrutiny of a military tribunal. The rope at Hamelin closed the arc. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6. Let that be your anchor as we step into the reflective wrap-up that carries us from past to present. In the stillness of this moment, we can see how the story of Irma Grese lingers as a whisper in our collective conscience. It tells us that repose can be deceptive, that youthful dreams can be corroded by ideology, and that societies must remain vigilant about how they distribute power and responsibility. The execution of the youngest Nazi woman hanged at 22 is not just a legal footnote. It is a mirror held up to the mechanisms that allow ordinary people to commit extraordinary crimes. As we drift towards sleep, we carry with us a gentle understanding. The past is a quiet companion that murmurs lessons into our ears. Tonight it is spoken of a young woman who walked a path of cruelty, of a justice that arrived with the swing of a rope, and of the enduring obligation to recognize and challenge the forces that nurture such darkness. Let the echoes of this tale settle into the background hum of your thoughts, and know that the night holds many more stories, waiting patiently for the hour when you are ready to listen again. As Irma Grese's grim journey reaches its quiet end, the echoes of that final gallows step fade into the hush of memory. In that stillness we remember her youth and the weight of choices that sealed her fate. Now, in the same dim corridor of history, two other names wait: Elisabeth Volkenrath and Johanna Bormann, each carrying a story that followed hers to the scaffold. Let us drift toward their intertwined fates, attentive to the shadows they cast beside Irma's own. Close your eyes if it feels safe, soften the muscles across your forehead, and let your breathing settle as we begin tonight's gentle journey through history. Before we travel back in time, would you gift me a small connection to the present? In the comments, whisper your city and the local time. I love imagining the constellation of sleepy lights that flicker across the globe as we share these stories. Feel the weight of your body sinking into your mattress or favorite chair. Notice the cadence of your inhale and exhale, and allow the hush of this narration to become a lullaby that also remembers. History can be heavy, especially when we walk the quiet corridors of the Second World War, but even the most solemn truths can be held with calm reverence. The title of tonight's tale beckons us toward two women whose names seldom rise above a shadow. Elisabeth Volkenrath and Johanna Bormann, the other two women hanged alongside Irma Grese. Their story is a reminder that power can take unthinkable forms, and that the unusual jobs they held drew them into a dark, lucrative, and influential machinery. We will trace how they arrived in those roles, the rare authority they wielded, the wealth of rations and privilege they received, and the impact they left on the survivors who testified against them. Let your breath be slow and deep. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6. Now, let us drift backward. Imagine a train station in the late 1930s. The air smells of coal and rain-soaked wool. There is a young woman, Elisabeth Mühlau, who would marry and become Elisabeth Volkenrath, standing on a platform in what was then the province of Silesia. Born on September 5, 1919, in a village called Schönau an der Katzbach, she had trained as a hairdresser, a modest trade in a small town. The world around her was shifting under the weight of ideology and ambition. Opportunities for women were officially limited, yet the Nazi state created a curious opening: the role of female SS auxiliaries, known as Aufseherinnen, who would guard female prisoners in concentration camps. These roles were unusual, not factory work or nursing, but positions of authority where women could wield power, earn comparatively higher wages, receive better rations, and inhabit hierarchical structures previously reserved for men. The call went out in newspapers, offering steady pay, uniforms, and the prestige of serving the Reich. Elisabeth answered. Meanwhile, Johanna Bormann had already begun her own path. Born on September 10, 1893, in a village named Birkenfeld near the East Prussian town of Labio, she grew up on farmland. She worked as a domestic servant and later as a gardener. By 1938, at the age of 45, she made a fateful choice, applying to work at the SS-run concentration camp system. For a woman in rural East Prussia, the job promised escape from poverty, access to resources, and a sense of belonging to the national project. The pay, often around 150 to 100 Reichsmarks per month, depending on rank, came with lodging, clothing, and food, a significant upgrade from farm labor or domestic service. Beyond money, there was influence. Guards could requisition goods, command prisoners, and experience a form of power that had been historically rare for women of their social class. This is what the job was: a rare path to social elevation, albeit through a system of terror. As our narration drifts to 1939, picture the snow laced across the rooftops of Ravensbrück, the women's concentration camp north of Berlin. Ravensbrück was both a place of imprisonment and a training ground for female guards. Elisabeth arrived there in October 1941, joining the SS as an Aufseherin. Within weeks, she donned a grey-green uniform and a black triangular cap. She learned to bark commands, conduct roll calls, and oversee forced labour. The job demanded a strange mix of domestic skills and militarised discipline. New guards were taught to catalogue inmates, supervise punishments, and collect secret rewards, extra bread, stolen jewelry, confiscated clothing. Daily rations for guards included meat, butter, sugar, and ration coupons that could be exchanged in the camp canteen for chocolate or cigarettes commanding high value on the black market. This was wealth of a particular wartime sort, wealth that came from privilege and scarcity. Elizabeth would have lived in the block reserved for female staff, where rooms were simple but warm, a world away from the freezing barracks of prisoners. Johanna, by contrast, began her guard career at Lichtenberg in October 1938, one of the first camps for women, before it closed. She moved to Ravensbrück in May 1939. By joining early, Johanna became part of a cohort of women who had seniority, an advantage that translated into promotions and better pay. She learned the techniques of supervising the prisoner labor details, particularly those working in the camp's workshops and agricultural plots. The job's unusual nature drew public fascination. Newspapers of the era sometimes described the female guards as symbols of modernity. But within the camp, these guards wielded immense, often violent influence over the lives of thousands. Johanna's superiors noted her sternness, her readiness to employ dogs to intimidate inmates, and her loyalty to SS directives. This behavior, while brutal, secured her a reputation that helped her rise to senior positions when transferred. Now, let your breathing soften again, noticing the cool air filling your lungs. The railway lines shift, and we glide forward to March 1942. Elizabeth Volkenrath is reassigned to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the camp complex in occupied Poland where industrialized murder and forced labor merged. She became a block Führerin, a block leader, responsible for a women's barracks. The environment reinforced the power she held. Guards conducted inspections, supervised selections, and determined work rosters. Her authority brought influence measured in life and death. Witness statements later described how guards like Elizabeth used their position to request better clothing from storage, to claim prisoner-made goods, and to barter with male SS officers for favours. The SS payroll records show that by mid-1944 she earned around 180 Reichsmarks per month, plus allowances. A middle-class wage accompanied by status. She even married another member of the SS, Heinrich Volkenrath, an officer of the camp's political department, which further elevated her social standing within the camp bureaucracy. Johanna Bormann's path brought her to Auschwitz in March 1942 as well, after a stint overseeing punishment cells at Ravensbrück. She arrived as an experienced Aufseherin, taking up a role in the women's camp. Survivors remembered her by the nickname Weasel, the Weasel, referencing not only her physical agility, but her intense watchfulness. One of the unusual tasks assigned to female guards was supervising the women's forced agricultural labor on the camp farms. Johanna became associated with the camp's agricultural complex, particularly the dog kennel and the fields near Birkenau. The SS prized agricultural output because it supported the German war effort and provided goods for the camp staff. Guards who oversaw these sections sometimes received additional rations or priority access to produce. For Johanna, this meant a sense of proprietorship over the resources, and with it, influence. She could authorize prisoners to harvest vegetables, and she controlled the distribution of food to the SS kitchen, occasionally siphoning off the best items for personal consumption or exchange. As the spring of 1944 approached, the influence of these women grew. The Nazis accelerated deportations, and Auschwitz became a center of mass murder. Elizabeth was promoted to Oberaufseherin, the senior supervisor of the women's camp at Auschwitz, by November 1944. The promotion came after the death of her predecessor, Maria Mandel's absence, and the reorganization of the female hierarchy. Oberaufseherinnen received not just higher pay, but authority over hundreds of guards, and a voice in policy decisions within the camp. They attended meetings with male SS officers, discussed work quotas, and participated in selecting prisoners for the gas chambers. The promotion underscores how unusual the job was. Very few women in Nazi Germany had formal command over fellow women and held the power to influence logistics of a massive forced labor complex. Records show that an Oberaufseherin earned around 200 Reichsmarks per month, plus monthly clothing allowances and bonuses. They had a staff kitchen with better food and access to medical care. Elizabeth's influence reached beyond the compound. She could assign guards to specific details, reward loyalty, and request transfers. The role wrapped female ambition in the guise of service to the regime, and the privileges that came with it could be intoxicating. Meanwhile, in the early months of 1945, as the Soviet army advanced, Auschwitz was evacuated in January. Elizabeth managed the forced march westward, leading columns of women prisoners to the railway lines. Accounts from survivors describe her presence during the harrowing evacuation, where thousands died from cold and exhaustion. Those who survived remembered the guards who shouted orders, refused to allow the sick to rest, and sometimes shot stragglers. Elizabeth exerted her authority even in retreat. The SS relocated her to Bergen-Belsen in February 1945, a camp in northwestern Germany near the town of Schelle. Belsen, originally a prisoner of war camp, had been transformed into a concentration camp by late 1944. By the time Elizabeth arrived, it was overcrowded, starved, and ravaged by disease. She took up the role of Oberaufseherin there, alongside other transferred staff such as Irma Grese. Johanna also arrived at Bergen-Belsen in May 1945.